now joining us is Guillermo Escobar Roca, Director of the University of Alcalá in Spain.
Buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Enhorabuena a la presidenta, a la asociación. Espero que podamos pensar en la manera de colaborar con las universidades también. Bueno, hay un error, no soy el director de la Universidad de Alcalá, eso sería el rector, ¿no? El rector, no, yo creo que estoy aquí invitado y agradezco mucho, quizá también por la amistad con el presidente de la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de México y con Raúl Arias también. Estoy aquí quizás porque en la Universidad de Alcalá tenemos un proyecto de hace ya 20 años.
We have been holding a project for over 20 years now that is aimed to the ombudsman on Latin America. I just saw at the door a police vehicle that said professionalism, saying we need professionals. And I believe we have a great team with over 20 public officials in Latin America that need to be forming in this topic continuously. We definitely have some good professionals and some researchers, as we are bound to know what are the problems that our community is facing and how come human rights cannot be guaranteed. We need to study why, and we need to find some professionals, and maybe this is why I have been invited here. Close to here in Washington, January 11, 1994, the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, delivered his very famous speech on the Second Bill of Rights, where in essence he proposed incorporating social rights into the Constitution of the United States, a clear antecedent of the principles of interdependence and invisibility of human rights. Mr. Roosevelt concluded his speech back then like this: all these rights stand for security, and after we win this war, we must be willing to move towards new goals of human happiness and well-being. The right place for America in the world depends at large on the fact that these and similar rights are a reality for all of our citizens. Because while there is no security here or at home, there will be no lasting peace on earth. 4 years later, these rights were incorporated largely thanks to Eleanor Roosevelt, to the most memorable document in the history of humanity, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose objectives included freeing human beings from fear and misery. 70 years later, this declaration has only been half fulfilled, and millions of people are far from enjoying, as this declaration also did, a broader concept of freedom. History shows us that no right has been achieved without a struggle. The setbacks are also frequent. Even here, in the United Nations in New York in 1966, we witnessed a certain step back when the rights were divided into two blocks, limiting the system of individual claims for only one of them. The rights of 1948 were moral rights, although that does not diminish their value, and the 1966 rights are already legal rights. But you have to convince the judicial powers to apply them, to convince the legislators so that they can develop them, and convince the executives so that they get to respect them and protect them. We can and we must continue working on expanding the catalog of rights. For instance, with the environment, it's not yet recognized as a human right in international law. Always in a thoughtful and well-argued manner. Not any demand is a human right. But before we can do so, we have to insist on the fulfillment, also universal compliance, of the 1948 rights. Putting the rights on the paper is the first step, but clearly it's not sufficient. We have to fight every day so that they can be fulfilled. And in this struggle, it belongs to all of us, and especially to you, the youth, each one with its capabilities and possibilities. How? Well, first, as Roosevelt said, and in our own country, we need to incorporate them into the Constitution. Human rights must become legal within each country and at the highest level, the constitutional level, because the constituent power commands over the legislative and over the executive and judicial, which has already been achieved in almost the entire world. We have to work first to fight so that these rights act as obligatory, not just as mere policies. The approval of the Sustainable Development Goals is an interesting step, and especially because it allows us to measure our progress. But let's not fool ourselves. In 1966, it became clear that they were enforceable and not just desirable. And forgetting this key idea would imply a clear recoil. Second, outside of our borders, there are countries in the world where violations of human rights are very serious, and there are problems that can only be solved at a global level. These solutions are very difficult without a global constitutionalism, which is not expected in the midterm. Now, we also have mechanisms to protect the rights that we can enforce from home. For instance, international cooperation, something that's enforceable, controlling transnational companies, or asylum. All those institutions must broaden their spectrum, and we can definitely demand that from home. If one right is not to be fulfilled in any specific case, the solution is slightly easier, and that's why we have courts and ombudsmen, to whom we owe our support. Our struggle with the structure, or in general, is a lot more harder than the treaties itself. If I get to read all the agreements and the pacts from the United Nations, they definitely tackle this problem properly, as it has been laid out in several reports that we must disseminate. Structural problems require structural answers. For example, jail overpopulation. If there's a right that's not fulfilled, we will almost always find a gap on the importance of that right, or a lack of sensitivity towards that right, specifically coming from the government, and sometimes by society, because in the unknowingness of such right, they cannot demand the execution of this right. This is why we need to change our mindset. Even though we get to have some punishments around the violations of these rights, it's obvious that we're not going to get to each one of them. For example, jail overpopulation, as I said, would only have a long-lasting solution until we get to convince all of them that those who are prisoners are also human, and they're also entitled to every single right, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and not the other way around. We need to strive for protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community. We need to have a global change of perception on the way we regard these human beings. Therefore, the answer lies on a change of mentality. Definitely change the way we insert education on the syllabus of our governments and ministries of education. But a major change in education level, just looking back to an UNESCO report in 1973, which is basically forgotten, which shows that we should learn how to learn to think, to debate, to become active citizens and not passive citizens, to take part in our global politics, to be part of the information, and to respect all opinions, and for a collective search of common well-being above our personal interests. The main problem of the world and the problem of human rights is unknowingness. Our struggle needs to begin with our mindsets. We need to raise awareness, and we need to know who is the real enemy. Education on human rights? Well, yes. Well, first, education for those who violate human rights. Lack of culture and tolerance. If we don't identify who our enemy is, which will obviously be hiding from us and to disguise themselves, we won't make much progress. Thank you very much.